First of all, I want it to be known
Okay.
that this is not the church speaking. These are the words, thoughts of your name again.
Derek Star Redwine.
And I just walked in today
Yeah.
for this, and we're gonna just have a little general conversation.
Okay.
And I guess this is one of the closest. This is the closest church, one of the closest to the Robert E. Lee Monument. And I want to get some of your thoughts
Yeah.
on that because of the proximity of the church.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about racism. All right.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the casinos, and I want to talk about a little bit of the legalization of marijuana.
Sure.
But these are your thoughts, not the church thoughts.
I'm the interim pastor here, so it's not. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not the church yet.
Thank you.
But I'm sure there are people in the church who would agree with me on some of these things, but not as a collective group. So, couple things for context. So, I actually have a Black Lives Matter sticker on my car, which I had to preach on because I started a year ago at the first week at the right in the middle of lockdowns, and then protests started happening, and I had the sticker on my car, and so people were talking as church members tend to do, and so I just directly went and talked about it, gave my reasons why I had the sticker, what it was about, and it was fascinating because I really wanted them to respond to what was happening on our street, on our front porch. I was trying to help them realize it's a chance for us to reintroduce ourselves to the world, to the community, to people that the church has long been in opposition to or distanced from. And this church has a really long history of being pretty moderate, which is a wonderful thing, but also kind of hamstrings them. They have a hard time acting in a way they think is going to offend somebody. And so we couldn't even get folks to pass out. Well, some people on their own did stuff, but we just kind of kept going like things were normally going on, which was fascinating. I would preach about it. I would get a lot of negative feedback, some positive. You shouldn't talk about that. You shouldn't talk about that, but I kept doing it anyway. And looking back on that time, I think what I realize for mainline churches is they have a really hard time admitting their faults and admitting their sins. It feels like shame, and instead of being liberating for both them and those they've helped oppress, they kind of see it as a condemnation, and they get really defensive. And this is a church that's got diverse points of view, and so they don't want to offend each other, and so they choose civility over justice, which is and nothing. They're really good people, kind people. I've really enjoyed them. It's just interesting how much tension there is talking about race. You mentioned racism, so
yes.
I bring it up probably every other sermon in some form or fashion, in a way they will at least be able to hear. And most people are receptive. My whole thing is I believe my job is to apply the gospel to modern day life.
Make it relevant.
Make it relevant, and I think the only way you can do that is to talk about things that are happening. So that's been a challenge here because they want me to be kind of quieter about that kind of stuff.
Excuse us.
You're good. So, but at the same time, respectful of that. I think they're respectful of the challenges I have and the work I have to do. But yeah, the racism thing is fascinating. I think the prominent view here probably is that racism is an individual problem. I tend to take the approach that racism is more systemic, that it's a cultural thing, that it's baked into our systems, and which most people, but I think in this reformed kind of old school church, they're more of like, I'm not a racist, so why are you talking about it so much? And I'm more of like, well, the protests are happening. What does that have to tell us? What is God trying to say? In fact, I had a sermon where I talked about God is speaking to the protesters.
How so?
Oh, I think, that, crying out. My big thing is what is compelling these folks to do what they're doing? And I was arguing, I think it's the Spirit moving them to speak out against injustice, to say we're enough, we're tired of this, to call, like the prophets of old, to call into question things that we assume are okay and good. So overall, I don't think there was hostility here at the church about what was happening. It was more they wanted to kind of not pay attention to it. There was some folks who live in this neighborhood who were concerned about their safety. There wasn't much crime. It's funny, I said riots earlier because I was very intentional about calling it protests, but when I had arguments here, people would call it riots. That language switch, can make a big difference. Right?
Thank you.
So yeah, I think this is very emblematic of an older church that's trying to be relevant, but also doesn't want to offend. It's just amazing in the South how we can be nice but miss injustice in our desire to be nice. Like I walked a couple of the protests, quite a few actually, and I found it to be wonderful and beautiful and spiritual and loving, and the energy was really positive. And yet, to hear the spin politically and on the news about, sure, there were people causing trouble.
True.
There's people causing trouble everywhere. Plenty of white folks causing trouble, but it was interesting how people really hung to that narrative. So I actually enjoyed the opportunity. It was a very interesting experience. I came in from Cleveland. That's where I served last, Cleveland, Ohio. And racism's different up there than it is in the South. So I'm getting used to Southern racism, but it was very interesting to see how much people resisted taking stands, taking a side, out of what they would say out of respect for their friends who don't agree with them. We had some families leave the church because they just couldn't be part of the church and didn't have something to say, something to do. We had one guy that left. He's like, look, I don't really care what you do, just do something. If it's knocking on doors in the neighborhood and saying, how are you doing, that's fine. But we couldn't even, instead of that momentous activity.
That was then going on in front of the church.
I mean, literally our front steps. It was fascinating. And they were just.
And the tear gas?
That was at night.
Yeah.
Yeah, but our church we had vandalism twice. It was probably kids being stupid, like spray painting something, 666, really original stuff like that. But nothing, stuff that happens.
Okay.
So. There was no hostility. Some of the older members were scared to come to church. We were closed anyway because of COVID. I felt like it was a generational moment that we were witnessing history happen on our front steps. And I was surprised at how people didn't. The staff was excited about engaging it, and some people were, but most people were like, look, let's not go either way. Let's not be against it. Let's not be for it. Let's just be quiet. It'll pass.
But you had two types of history
to
go on from the first of all, the installation of the statues.
This neighborhood was built as a white flight kind of segregated place. It was built with intent. We have those flyers. We talked about it in the class we did. I'm proud that we talked about it. I kept talking about it even though they didn't want to. But I also realized I'm in Richmond, and this is an old school church, and they have a long way to go in terms of figuring out, being able to talk about this stuff. Good, smart people, kind people. So.
But then you had black and white taking up spray painting together, and then you had the removal
together. It was interesting. It's been fun. It's been interesting to watch. People basically camped out at Lee for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
It was really beautiful. The garden and the basketball hoops and
then all of a sudden the governor decided to put a fence in.
Fenced it up, yeah. Yeah.
So anything you can't control, you lock them up, and they locked you out.
Yeah. It's been. And again, my views are very different than the church's, so I'm not trying to be critical. I realize how much work we still have to do to educate people on.
Go ahead.
Educate people on.
Well, I look at the verdict of George Floyd. What happened there? They talk about changing policies.
Yeah.
Policies is okay, but how do you go about the change of culture? And that's the same things that's going on here at the church.
And that's the tension is so you want to. So it's interesting, we're sitting in here, I don't know if you see, but a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Lewis Powell, went to this church. This is his home church. And he was actually a pretty moderate justice. He was a pretty interesting guy. But his in the picture up there is his funeral.
At the church.
So at one point, every Supreme Court justice who was serving at the time was sitting in that front 2 pews.
What?
Yeah, at the funeral. They all came in separate cars. So Ginsburg was in here. This was in August of 98.
Lord have mercy.
So this church at that point was at the centerpiece of history, right? But he was a very moderate guy. And what's interesting to me is, this is where we talk about how do you change hearts and culture. we've lost the capacity to be in conversation with people we don't agree with. And so we just write them off. And I think so how do I meet these more conservative folks than me? How do I meet them at a spot? Listen to them, respect them, but not hold back what I believe. Like not,
You can't do it.
I mean, I think we have, but it takes,
talking about.
oh, thanks.
Is that?
That's good, yeah, thanks. But it takes so long. It takes so long. The work of, and that's what's frustrating me, is I don't think we have, we've been doing this for 400 years, we don't have time to be patient. Does that make sense? So I
It
struggle,
does.
I struggle with that. I need energy, I need movement, we need to make change, but also, how do I draw people alongside of me? You know, I think about King and Malcolm when in different points in their life. Like King was so much about coming together and working together, but then as he got older, he became a little more frustrated when it became about poor people and less about he got a lot of pushback, and he got a little more impatient as he got older. Whereas Malcolm, it seems like he went the other way. He became a little more. And I think that tension's in all of us. Like, you know, I want to work alongside you, but at some point, if you cross the line, I can't work with you anymore. I gotta fight the fight. And I think churches don't fight the fight very well because we want to be nice to each other. And so that's where my time here has got
Well,
me.
what did Jesus do?
Exactly, he was compassionate, but he wasn't nice. But it's interesting. People hear what they want to hear, and they see what they want to see. And I mean, I find him to be a very political figure, Jesus. Like he was challenging the authorities of his day and pushing back against oppression. And
How do you explain your past president, the lie, the election? The election was
the
stolen,
big lie. Yeah.
and they're still continuing pushing in that now. You have educated people continue to say that. How are we going to have any type of race relations? And this is continue going on. And then exactly what happened in Georgia and has passed on in terms of all this voter suppression.
It scares me. I mean, I'm scared. Not like existentially, oh my gosh, the world's falling, but I'm scared. I think it seems like there's 35% of this population in this country that are not willing to see people of color as equal. They can't comprehend.
And this is in 2021.
Well, I think they've always been there. I think Trump brought them out of the darkness. He normalized what before was considered shameful behavior. And it's funny, I was talking to, I don't know if you watched Saturday Night Live at all, but after Trump got elected, they had Chris Rock and a couple of their black comedians where they did the sketch where they were in a room watching the election results. And the white friends were like, I can't believe that he's winning. And the black folks were like, I can. And they kept saying, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. The black folks would be like, no, like this is America. Like, this is the story we know. So but I do believe. I read a lot of Kendi, which they can't stand here, but critical race theory and all that.
Oh my God, Southern Baptist Church.
Yeah, but what's interesting about it is he talks about there's racists, anti-racists, and then the people in the middle.
And white supremacists.
Yeah, but he would say, don't bother with the racists. Don't even try to. You're not going to change. If people's hearts are going to change, that's God's work. That's something else. But as what we have to do is get those people in the middle who are kind of. There's folks that are anti-racist that are working against it all the time in a good way. There's a lot of people in the middle who just don't do anything. They're not racist. They're not propagating white supremacy and whatnot, but they're not doing anything about it either. And his whole thing is that's the group you focus on. And I think that's this church. There are some people here who will never receive what I say, and that's okay. Whatever, it's what it is. So I've been trying to focus on the people who are open to listening. And I think there is hope in that 30% of the population that seems like what are you doing? I think there are a lot of people in the middle who are amenable to hearing a different story. He didn't win the election. He lost the election. And because people of color voted and they came out in force and were unified. And I mean, I'm hopeful that what's happening in Georgia and Texas and Florida and other places actually creates more energy amongst communities of color and to vote. And hopefully among businesses of white people to help them get.
And see, I look at what is it going to take for the churches
I don't know.
to come together, to have a dialogue.
I don't know. I taught a class this morning on the past, present, and future of the church, and I think God's breaking down the church. I think God's breaking it down to build something new. So I think the future church will look very different than the present church. And it's not going to be, I'm hoping the future church is not a segregated church where people are not in dialogue. But institutions die hard. You know that. They take a long time to go away. I mean, that statue's, the lawsuit was filed, what, a year ago, and it's still standing there.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it's like we all want to come, even the conservatives around here want to come down because they're tired of being a conflict point, but it still stands.
But there's still no conversation.
I know.
There's still no dialogue.
It's stuck. It's stuck in limbo. So, I think there have been conversations in the city. There's been there's been people talking. I mean, a lot of churches. It's funny. I was telling this one person who was mad at me for preaching about this. I said, look, you go to every church, they're talking about this. Conservative churches are talking more about race than we are, because they're more diverse typically. Typically, more evangelical churches have more cultural and religious diversity and more ethnic and racial diversity. And I think every church is talking about it. The problem is, how do you take that talk and put it into action? How do you get people to do things that actually move the needle and change things? I'm very sad about it. I mean, working here has been wonderful and hard at the same time. So.
Well, look, this was done on impulse, and I did not try to come and take up your Mother's Day Sunday.
It's okay.
So
my wife's working anyway. So. But it's going to be. I have hope. I have a friend who runs a national organization for churches, so he kind of supports clergy. And 5 years ago, there's these small cohorts. It's actually headquartered in Atlanta. These small cohorts meet all around the country.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 years ago, or 3 years ago when he started, there was maybe 15% of those cohorts were people of color.
Okay.
Today, he's got 50% of people in the organization are people of color. 50% are women, which is a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's hired a bunch of people of color on staff. And he's like, to get these pastors in the rooms together from all walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, it's been amazing. And he's like, once he steps out of like one denomination, like Methodist or Episcopalian or Presbyterian, once he steps out and looks at the church bigger, he's like, there's some amazing stuff happening on the boundaries. And there are some really exciting things, and there are black voices that are finally being heard and respected and listened to. And he's very encouraged, not by the church, but by what God is doing
in his realm.
Yeah, and I have to believe that God is. I was reading Strength of Love this morning,
and what is the Strength of Love?
It's Martin Luther King's book on some sermons he wrote in Strength of Love. And this sermon I was reading this morning was about how do you keep hope. And he was talking about how when you fly across the Atlantic in an airplane, it takes you go fast when you're going to Europe. When you come back, you go slower because there's a headwind. But you don't turn around; you just keep going. It just takes longer because there's a headwind.
Mm-hmm.
How do we keep going even though there's a headwind? And he talked. He had a good riff about that with the world. But I feel like we're just going against a really strong headwind of racism in this country. That we're going to get there, but it's going to take longer than we want. And I think finally we're coming to terms with, we're not there. We're not even close to being there.
Well, I guess the last thing I'll sit and talk to you about, and we didn't touch on, is gentrification. Well, we didn't talk about the casino, and we didn't talk about gentrification.
No, gentrification is terrible.
And then I'm looking at the price of the real estate.
Oh my, Richmond's got a housing crisis.
Oh,
and the freeways cut through Richmond. I mean, all the black communities were just steamrolled by all these highways. I mean, you read that story, like literally black communities just like, goodbye.
Yeah.
Bye. We're going to tear you up now.
There was no compensation.
No. And we're going to put you in projects. We're going to cluster you all together on the east side where nobody in the west end has to see you.
Now, they want the east side.
Yeah, totally. Oh, yeah. You can't afford to live in the east side now. The prices there have gone, Richmond's got a huge affordable housing crisis. And we're going to become, if we don't address it, it's funny, the story, but the bus lines in Richmond only go east-west because they were designed to bring the domestic workers from the east side to west end and back. This city, the history of this city is the redlining.
How much has it changed, and how much has it remained the same?
Oh, it's mostly remained the same. I think what's changed is there are more pockets of resistance. There are more organizations and people fighting. Where you were saying earlier, what hasn't changed is the systems that got us here. Like, we haven't fundamentally changed how we pay for schools. We haven't fundamentally changed how we make housing affordable. We haven't fundamentally changed, I would argue, racism in the police. Like, we haven't changed these.
The culture.
Back to culture. And again, that's not one person being bad and one person being good. That's a whole. As you said earlier, how do you change how do you change a culture? It's hard. It takes time. I have more hope than despair, but this is a fascinating place to be living. But the East Side, it's fascinating. Like,
Now I look at
how do you feel about the casino? I'm curious what you think.
I don't want it. They talk about raising money, but all you're doing is taking one part of money, and the same way with the marijuana.
Oh,
You know,
yeah. Robbing Peter pay Paul.
I know that I can't win in numbers.
Yeah.
All right, the odds are not in my favor.
No.
But it's almost like saying the Great White Hope
Yeah.
is a casino. Now, at the end of the day, who's making money? They're saying that they're going to give back to the community.
They won't give back. They'll pay people. People have jobs, but
To what extent?
well, I'm against it too. I would vote against it no matter where it was put.
Well, I'm looking at two places. One over there by Movie Clip over Arthur Ashe, and one over by Philip Morris.
Yeah.
Now, more likely they would go to Philip Morris because it's over the South Side.
Yeah, they don't care about the South Side. Yeah.
And you don't have that much. They don't care about that traffic being dumped over there.
Yeah.
But I'd be damned if they're gonna put it over there in Scott Landing. Oh, excuse me, I'm in church.
Okay.
They're not gonna put it in Scott's Landing.
No.
All right. So I'm saying the no going over there, but the yes is coming over here. And
I think the city will vote no. I think enough.
I don't think so.
You really don't?
I don't think so. I don't think
You
so.
think once it gets on ballot, it'll pass?
And the reason why I'm saying that is because of the way of the lottery.
Yeah, that's true.
The way of the lottery. And see, if people look at the lottery and the lies that was told that all of the money would go into education. Now the state stopped giving money to education, and you know it's completely crazy. The same thing I feel about the marijuana. We are not quote unquote creating jobs.
No, we're just
residual.
We're transferring wealth from black people to white people.
That's all.
I mean, Philip Morris they've bought up marijuana. They're like trying to.
They're ready for it.
Oh, they're going to make so much money off of it.
That's why he's talking about stopping menthol cigarettes.
Totally. My biggest frustration with that, and this drives me crazy, is you've got black men and women in prison for selling a dime bag here and there, who had a good business selling marijuana, and then you're going to legalize it while they're in prison, and then a bunch of maybe some black people, but mostly white rich people are going to come in, and it's going to become the new Coca-Cola, and they're going to market it and they're going to sell it, and all these entrepreneurs who were making a living on the street are criminalized. They're in prison, but now the corporate CEOs can make a killing off.
You know, it's ironic that you sit and said that. I asked Senator McCullen yesterday.
Oh, really?
I have not even taken it off this tape. You passed the legalization. You passed the legislation on marijuana. All right? You promised to give back to the community after it's set up. But my question is, from the seed to the store,
Oh, no,
where are the jobs?
Yeah.
We working on it.
It's a classic. It's a bait and switch.
And see, the black community who suffered the worst
yeah.
is still getting,
Yeah.
but by not having a conversation or a dialogue, they don't know. All right?
And you got, and drug use is the same among white people as among black people.
But they just don't,
They don't
go
get
after
caught.
them.
They don't. I mean, it's drug use. I mean, that's a number I love. Drug use doesn't matter the race or ethnicity. Drug use is the same across all platforms, and yet our prisons are chock full of black people. And that's funny. I'll end with that. I gotta go in a second. But my favorite thing, when I get frustrated with people and I argue with them, I'll make this argument and they don't like it, but I'll say, okay, our prisons are chock full of black people. Like, people of color are disproportionately in prison. Like, it's not even, and you can't argue with that. Like, here are the numbers. So why is that the case? It seems to me we have two choices. One, black people deserve it, and they're stupid, and they do drugs more, they do crime more. That's the only logical thing, is that they, as a group of people, they are less than. They can't figure it out. Or we've got a world, and again, I'll say drug use is the same across all platforms. Crime is the same across all platforms. Or we've got a system that prejudices this group and shuffles them into prison. Which one will it be? Well, I'm like, no, which one is it? I said, do you believe that black people are equal? Yes, I do. Okay, then why are these numbers the way they are? If they're as smart as we are, as strong as we are, I would argue stronger, well, they've been through, why is it happening? Well, no, it's because the game's rigged, right?
Thank you.
And it's so interesting to hear people kind of like to watch the wheels turn. Cause I don't think most people want to perceive themselves as a racist. Like they love people, all people. But when they see how they've benefited from systems that have hurt others, that awareness at first is so shocking and so disappointing that unless they have courage, they have a hard time getting past it.
And being honest.
Well, they feel shame. Like they feel totally ashamed, and if they don't have the capacity to deal with that shame and ask for forgiveness and move on, then they get angry, because shame leads to anger if it's not processed. Then you get righteous white people running around in the name of the law, because what they're feeling is shame for what. I mean,
we're gonna stop right there, and we're gonna continue. We can continue this. I'm gonna start coming to your church, and I got that on tape.
You won't hear it from the pulpit. No, I love these folks.